Mike O'Brien is our guest. He wrote the book America's Destruction of Iraq from the unique perspective of being a former George W. Bush administration appointee and as a former Department of Defense contractor who spent 14 months in Iraq. Mike O'Brien, I want to start by showing the cover of the book America's Destruction of Iraq. I want you to describe what this picture is on the cover of your book.
Well, thanks a lot, John. The photograph on the cover was taken by Khalid Mohammed. He's an AP photographer, and I purchased the rights to the photograph to put it on my book. But to be more specific, I was about a mile away from that when it went off. I was walking from my one job at the Ministry of Defense building right at the north end of the IZ, or the Green Zone, the International Zone, we called it when I was there, but the Green Zone, formerly known, popularly known. And I was walking down a barricaded walkway back to Phoenix Base, the U.S. base where the commander of the Multinational Security Transition Command, MnSTCI, Martin Dempsey at the time, back to my office there when this went off. And I honestly, the earth, everything, the ground shook. I thought a rocket had landed just on the other side of the wall. And we found out about an hour later that had gone off. And it was about a ton and a half of explosives in a market, and about 134 Iraqis were essentially vaporized when it went off. About another 350 were seriously injured. And when I saw that photograph on the cover of Stars and Stripes about 2 days later, I'd already thought about writing my book. And at that moment, true story, I looked at that and I said, I want that picture on the cover of my book, because it describes, picture's worth 1,000 words, the destruction that has been going on since we invaded in '03.
And you say what happened here with the security of that market is an example of sort of the lack of planning that you're so critical of in this book. Explain that.
Well, we invaded and all that, and the whole story, and then we disband the Iraq. Paul Bremer disbands the Iraqi army and the Iraqi National Police. So the whole thing was creating an army and national police from nothing, which is one of the reasons I was over there. But the Guard, the story in Stars and Stripes, which I cited in my in my book, the Guard is just an Iraqi guy, trying to feed his family, and he's standing there, and he lived, and he was interviewed, and the truck pulled up with the explosives, and he was told, "Don't let anybody in, no vehicles, just pedestrians." And the insurgent pulled up with the truck. And he said, and the Guard said, "Nope, this is, these are Iraqis, of course, talking to each other." And he says, "Nope, no trucks in." And the insurgent said, according to the Guard, "Oh, I really have to get in. I really got to deliver my stuff." And the Guard went, "Okay." And that was that. That was it. And all those people died. And it was the biggest single attack at the time. That was in '07. That was in 2007, I can't remember the exact date, and it's just a snapshot of the situation over there since we invaded.
Mike O'Brien, the author of America's Destruction of Iraq, a unique perspective on the war, the rebuilding process, the rise of ISIS. We're talking to him. If you want to join in this morning in the conversation, Democrats, it's 202-748-8000. Republicans, 202-748-8001. Independents, 202-748-8002. A special line for Iraq war veterans if you want to call in this segment, 202-748-8003. Towards the end of the book, you write, "I did not write this book because I hate my country. I love my country. However, I hate what my country's leadership has done in Iraq and what it has done to the Iraqi people. Unfortunately, it's still going on." Who do you blame more here, the military or the political leaders in this country, for what you see went wrong in Iraq?
Well, of course, everybody's got a hand in it, but in our country, it all starts at the top with the president. And if you look at Iraq, it started with getting him out of Kuwait in '91, 12 years, and then we go in '03. My whole book, and I need to say this before I forget to say it, My book is about accountability, or I should say, the complete lack of accountability. And when we went in '03, and for your viewers, I'm a West Point graduate. I was an infantry officer. I know a little bit about the military. And when we went into Iraq in 2003, why did we go? That's the political thing. Why did we go? That was then the way it was executed with Rumsfeld and the military, Tommy Franks. If you're going to go, have a good reason. Okay, we didn't, in my opinion. You know, the whole slam dunk. Mr. President, Saddam's got WMD. And the other thing is, when you execute it right. Execute it right. Donald Rumsfeld wanted to go in with about 30 or 35,000 soldiers to invade a country, a sovereign country, the size of the eastern seaboard of the United States. We ended up going up to about 120 coalition, but nowhere near enough to execute the mission and get the job done, just enough to get killed themselves, and by disbanding the Iraqi army and national police, fueled the fire of the insurgency, because all these guys now are out of a job.
You're especially critical in this rebuilding part of the book about the contractors that the U.S. used in Iraq. You were a contractor in Iraq.
I was. And of course, when people hear the word contractor in Iraq in the same sentence, they think of mercenaries, security contractors. And I call them mercenaries because if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And we have contractors doing the job of soldiers. That's a mercenary. But I was a contractor over there. I'm a real estate guy. So, you know, people go, what's a real estate guy doing? Well, I was over there to help the rebuilding and the recreation of the new Iraqi army. You have to recruit soldiers, you have to arm soldiers, you have to equip them, you have to house them. And I was involved in the infrastructure. I was involved in the basing and the construction of the barracks and the facilities. But the contractors over in Iraq were making a windfall. The money that was being made, the money that was being lost, the total lack of accountability on the part of the contractors. I have there's 200 photographs in my book, and photographs of the base down at in Talil near where $118 million was spent to build a little farther to build barracks that were not fit for an animal to live in. The stuff you're looking at, if the audience can see these photographs, those facilities were not 18 months old. They were not quite 18 months old when those pictures were taken. And the American contractor, the 4 American construction companies over there that were making that money, they were paid $118 million to deliver that product. I zero in on that because I'm a real estate guy. Real estate is my profession. That's the one that pays the bills. And I'm not a career author or career policy guy. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just one tiny, tiny, tiny example of the slipshod accountability of money being spent in Iraq since '03.
Page 253 of your book, it finally started to sink in what being a contractor in Iraq was really all about. I was just a warm body who was a source of revenue for my company to collect fees off the U.S. government. No one cared if I accomplished a thing. We're talking with Mike O'Brien, author of the book, America's Destruction of Iraq. Let's get to calls. Teresa's waiting in Bolingbrook, Illinois, line for Independence. Teresa, good morning.
I just wanted to say the whole reason the U.S. went into Iraq in the first place wasn't because of nuclear weapons. It was the same thing with Libya. It was because of currency. And the United States has been invading countries for their own purpose, not to make the countries better, but for their own selfish, greedy reasons. And you look at every country that they've invaded. What country has really benefited from what the United States has done? Not one country. And the U.S. invaded Libya. You have all of these refugees dying at sea, trying to get to Europe. And now Europe doesn't want them, but they participated in destroying their countries. So the United States is the reason why ISIS exists today. They don't talk about the part that Saudi Arabia is playing in it, and that's their ally. They brag about Saudi Arabia and Israel being their ally.
Well, Mike O'Brien, go ahead.
You know, you're bringing up a really good point, and the whole point is, why are we invading countries, and look at what happens after we invade them. And you know, I say this in my book. If country A invades country B, it should be because country B is an ally and is being invaded by a neighbor, country C. Or country B is not a friend of ours and is invading a neighbor. Well, that happened in '91. That wasn't happening in 2003. I mean, let's just face it. Even if you forget the whole weapons of mass destruction thing, even if you forget all that, even if you get down to the currency versus oil or whatever, we invaded a sovereign country. And again, I love the United States of America, but we invaded a sovereign country led by a bad guy. But there's a lot of countries led by bad guys today. We invaded a sovereign country led by a bad guy, and they weren't satisfying either. Saddam wasn't invading a neighbor and wasn't being invaded by anybody. Why did we do this? And you bring up a good point.
We have a special line this morning for Iraq War veterans. Curtis is on that line from Georgia, a Republican. Curtis, good morning to you.
Yes, good morning. Just wanted to make a few comments. Just your last comments about invading sovereign nations. I went in 2005 to 2006 when the insurgency was out of control. I was doing convoy escort. You have to realize how these people were living under Saddam Hussein. I mean, death was an everyday thing for the Iraqi people. It still is today. The reason ISIS has been created is because our president pulled American soldiers out of Iraq after winning the victory, after calming the situation down. These people are going to be fighting each other forever. Now, you've got all these refugees flooding into Europe, and it's because we withdrew our troops from Iraq. And just to make my last point,
please,
it will happen in Afghanistan. And what has happened, these people know that we're going to leave. We got soldiers in Japan. We've got soldiers still in Europe. We've got them all over the world. Well, our president decided to pull them out of Iraq, and they're going to pull them out of Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is going to be twice as worse than Iraq.
Well, you know, the thing about it is, the points you're making are very valid. But here's the thing. Think about it this way, and I'm not trying to belittle anything that you've said. You're making some really good points. The whole thing about pulling out. Should Obama have pulled out of Iraq and so on and so forth? But we were there because we invaded in '03. He wouldn't have been pulling anybody out of Iraq in 2011 if we hadn't have invaded in '03. You can't look at anything related to Iraq right now, 2011, whatever, without going, why are we there in the first place? And again, back to my point, we disbanded the Iraqi army and the national police, so then we had to take the job over ourselves, and we didn't have enough manpower to do it.
To that point, as you know, former Vice President Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney out with a new book, Exceptional: Why the World Needs a Powerful America is the title of that book. Reviews on that book coming out this weekend, and the former vice president talking about the invasion of Iraq in 2003 in that book, writing, "Those who say the invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a mistake are essentially saying that we would be better off if Saddam Hussein were still in power. The closest that the book comes to contrition concerns the execution of the war, not its rationale, the review in the Washington Post notes. Quote, the war to liberate Iraq was indisputably difficult, the authors write. It included tragedy and challenges we did not foresee. Every war does, but these tragedies and challenges do not detract from the rightness of our cause.
Okay. I would say that the former vice president is suffering from a real serious case of denial. To say that the rationale, okay, let's look at the rationale for us going into the war. Second to last chapter of my book, A Desire for War. I cite, Tyler Drumheller, who passed away in August, former CIA analyst. His book, On the Brink, got into much detail about what was going on in Langley leading up to the invasion. The president George W. Bush had a handful of advisors that wanted to invade Iraq. How do you invade Iraq? What was Saddam doing? The sanctions and all that. The caller talking about the life of the Iraqis under Saddam. No one said it was great. I never said it was great. No way. But I would say to that to our caller, the veteran, I would say this: how many Iraqis are dead because of our invasion in 2003? How many Iraqis are dead? Say 500,000. Let's just throw out a number, 500,000. I feel very comfortable saying 500,000. How many have left their country since our invasion? Estimates are about 3.5 million. How many American soldiers are dead and maimed for life because of our invasion? Who knows? 4,500 dead. The point being, what's worse? Life under Saddam, and I worked with Iraqis. Our caller was a soldier. He was with his unit. I was with Iraqis every day. And they said it wasn't fun, but if you stayed out of trouble, and if you didn't stand on a street corner and go down with Saddam, if you did that, you disappeared. But if you didn't do that, you just lived your life. And that changed when we invaded in 2003.
Let's bring in another Iraq war vet. Ralph is calling in from Bethesda, Maryland. Ralph, you're on with Mike O'Brien.
Yes, I take exception to Mr. O'Brien's comment about weapons of mass destruction. Even though that they did not find any, all the intelligence agencies said there were weapons of mass destruction that Saddam had, and that was one of the bases of entering Iraq war. Even though they didn't find any, how could all these intelligence agencies bungle that type of information? That's the first way. I truly feel there was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq at that time. However, he moved them out to Syria or wherever because he's used them before back prior to 2003.
If I may, Ralph, the whole weapons of mass destruction thing, and that argument, he moved them to Syria and all that. It's a stretch. I mean, let's face it. To have a weapons of mass destruction program, you have to have the facilities. You have to have the infrastructure. You have to have, you have to have an infrastructure to build it. When George Tenet said to the president, Mr. President, it's a slam dunk that Saddam's got a weapons of mass destruction program. For the director of Central Intelligence to have said that, he would have had to have absolute, irrefutable evidence. Irrefutable. People on the ground, human intelligence, which Bill Clinton had drastically watered down, people that had gone actually, touched the stuff. We invaded. Where was it? We still haven't found it. We found a bunch of old used artillery rounds with a chemical weapons symbol on them. And the other thing I want to address the caller on, Curveball, the Iraqi defector that the president referred to in his speech And then 1 week later, Colin Powell is at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning at the CIA trying to find something credible to say it to the UN the next day. Well, why is he doing that? Because a week before, the president had said, this is the deal. So it turns out Curveball made it all up. Made it all up. A guy named Al Janabi. And that was our main source of intelligence, that he was in German custody, and George Tenet never even sent his own guys over to interrogate the guy and ask him questions before the invasion. Why would he not do that? Because he didn't want to.
Bill's waiting on our line for Democrats. Port Royal, Pennsylvania. Bill, you're on with Mike O'Brien, author of America's Destruction of Iraq.
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody that George Tenet, I believe, was CIA director under Clinton for about 4 years before he made those announcements. And, George Bush was in office for 8 months when they knocked down the buildings in New York City. And Clinton was in office for 8 years before that. So anything that happened up to 9/11 was planned under Bill Clinton's watch, not under George Bush's watch. And George Tenet and the CIA and everybody else, everybody in Europe, kept saying, that Saddam still had WMDs. So I really believe that. And I just heard Colin Powell about 8 months ago in an interview. Just stick by what he said. He said, yes, we thought that they had WMD. So that's one reason it made up the president's mind, I believe.
Well, good point. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was handed. He was Osama bin Laden on a platter. He was handed Osama bin Laden on a silver platter after the attack on the USS Cole. Madeleine Albright said, no, we shouldn't go after him. What will the Muslim world think? Nobody wanted to go after him except Richard Clarke and my West Point classmate, who was at the time Clinton's ambassador at large for counterterrorism, Mike Sheehan. He was there. And, Dick Clark, Richard Clarke, was the only one that said, Mr. President, I got a plan. Let's take this guy out. Let's go after this guy. He's killing Americans. And both Clinton and Albright said, no, we don't want to do that. And of course, the rest is history. And my classmate Mike Sheehan apparently said after the meeting was over, what do we have to do? Wait until they bomb the Pentagon? And the thing is, I totally agree with the caller. Would 9/11 have happened if Bill Clinton had taken out Osama bin Laden? And I will state equivocally, it would not have. Put it this way, the head would have been cut off of the organization. Now, may it happen? May 9/11 have happened? Well, it might have. Somebody else would have been running the show. Chances are it never would have happened. And of course, we all know it's changed our lives. But George W. Bush, yes, he was only in office for about 8 months when that occurred. He was handed, he was handed a pig and a poke because Bill Clinton dropped the ball.
And you were part of the effort, the recount effort in Florida.
Oh, yeah.
That ended up ending that election.
I was part of the recount election in Florida. I was there in Miami-Dade in the building, the Miami-Dade County Office Building in downtown Miami. I can tell you, I was there. I was in the room where they were counting the Chads because Al Gore was under 1,000 votes shy of George W. Bush. And the Democrats, this is going to raise their hair, but it was Al Gore who tried to steal the election, not the other way around, because what happened, the county election staff, any ballot that couldn't be determined, they made their own determination of who the vote was for. How do you do that in America? If the card was mangled or marked up, they determined who the vote was for. Trust me, because Gore only selected the most heavily Democrat counties in the state, it was going way in Gore's favor. And I also witnessed, we didn't count them, we observed county employees doing it, where they would go Gore, 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 and all of a sudden, Gore, and it wasn't for Gore. They just were so used to going Gore because it was the most heavily Democrat county in the state. So it was all leaning his way. It was all orchestrated by Al Gore to get those 1,000 votes, and it didn't work.
And that story, just the first one or two chapters of the book, America's Destruction of Iraq. Monty, who's been following along on Twitter, writes, the destruction of the Iraq infrastructure and its social and political fabric are main reasons underlying the current Mideast problems. Let's go to Albert, who's been waiting in Delaware, line for independence. Albert, you're on with Mike O'Brien.
Mr. O'Brien, I appreciate you writing the book and all, and I apologize for those veterans that are still in denial. They just want to pass the buck onto something that they were fighting for, something that was honest and just, and it was really a situation that just got out of control. But I wanted to ask, my question is, can you place the destruction of Iraq to the neocons? That's the neoconservatives that advise President Bush at the time. Thank you.
Absolutely, no question about it. This whole term neocon, neoconservative, whatever. George W. Bush, I've met the man, I've shaken his hand, a couple photographs in the book of me and the president, and he's a nice guy. Well, you know, so was Jimmy Carter. I mean, the fact of the matter is, he had people in his close inner circle, Dick Cheney, who, by the way, had better things to do in the 60s than military service when he was being nominated for Secretary of Defense, and Paul Wolfowitz, Donald Rumsfeld, Condi Rice, and they had agendas. The day after 9/11, when the president had his powwow with the 5 or 6 principal secretaries at Camp David, you know, Paul Wolfowitz kind of sneaks in, and the president said, "Paul, what are you doing here?" "Oh, Mr. President, I need to be here." And the president said, "Okay," instead of saying, "Well, you're not a cabinet secretary, are you?" And Paul Wolfowitz was one of the key people pushing for the invasion of Iraq the day after and the weeks after 9/11. And nobody said, what are you talking about Iraq for? And you'll read in my book, Afghanistan after 9/11, no problem, not for me. But then leaving and going to Iraq, and then, and then Afghanistan, what happens when you don't maintain it? Turns out where it is right now. And so the neocons were calling the shots in the Bush administration, and it's a real shame, and I agree with the caller completely. And again, lack of accountability and lack of the president to be able to say, we're not going to do that. Why would we do that? Why would we go to Iraq? Then again, they were most likely playing on the threat to his father and, you know, Saddam's supposed threat of his father and this, that, and the next thing. But Saddam wasn't invading anybody, and he wasn't being invaded, and it was a sovereign country, and we invaded a sovereign country, and we're not supposed to do that. I thought the Nazis did that when they went into Poland. Why did we do that? And we're supposed to be the good guys.
Time for one or two more calls. Tracy's been waiting, Minneapolis, Minnesota, line for Republicans. Tracy, good morning.
Good morning. Hi, Mr. O'Brien.
Hey, Tracy.
How much the problem is, I think, in our country right now, is that these think tanks have gotten extremely powerful. The Council of Foreign Relations, PNAC, the Project for New American Century, and they're outside any scrutiny of their unelected officials, and they hold so much power that I think they run both sides of the political parties in these key positions. And they, I don't know if they intimidate or whatever, or they threaten them that they can't get reelected, but they when they make decisions, they all scatter and they all have financial interest in it, and we're left here to deal with scratching our heads, and everybody's gone and nobody's held accountable, and we never do any after-action reviews. Just everything is outside of anything of the typical American scrutiny, or we're unable to hold anybody accountable.
You know, I'll tell you, no offense to my other callers, but boy, that's a real good question, and I'm telling you, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, okay? No way at all. But you're right. There are organizations, and these are people who are either insanely rich or have way too much political power than they deserve, and you go, who's running the show? And the thing about it is, why are we here right now? Why did I write my book? Why was I fortunate enough to be invited by C-SPAN and by John onto this show? It's educate the American people. People need to be educated. Hey, this is what's happening here. You know, my book's not the only one, of course. You know, highly recommend it. But you know, I took information from a lot of different sources, plus my own firsthand information. You're right. The military-industrial complex. Well, you know, during the Second World War, it gets to your point. Companies were started to build boats, planes, bullets, rifles. Great. We needed that stuff. The U.S. government didn't have the ability to do it all. The war ends, and these companies are going, especially if they're owned by shareholders, well, where's my return? What are you going to make and sell for me today? And then you go, well, is the tail wagging the dog here? What's going on? What's the real need for a lot of this stuff?
You said you don't believe in conspiracies. Why did you feel the need to re-argue whether President Obama was born in the United States or not in your book?
Well, you know, the reason I brought that up was because of, again, it's the accountability thing. We're debating, and for the readers, I talk about a lot of things in my book. This is one of them. You know, you might say, what's that got to do with the Iraq War? Well, the fact of the matter is, everything starts at the top. As I said earlier in my interview, who are we electing as presidents? Just because somebody gets elected president doesn't mean he's right for the job. And I'm not saying that just about Barack Obama. I'm saying it about George Bush. I'm saying it about a lot of people. We need to elect better presidents. And now they're saying the whole debate about the 14th Amendment, well, you know, it's open for interpretation. Well, when Obama was elected, the fact to me was that he was not able to prove that he was born in the United States. There's no question his mother was an American. Now they're saying, don't need that proof. All you need is an American parent. But at the time I wrote that, the whole debate was the guy even born here in the United States? Now that's a real that's a major that would be a topic of discussion between you could call me a birther, you can call me whatever you want, but I haven't been, me personally, I haven't been convinced that he was born in the United States. And
you're not convinced by the website or the birth certificate that the administration has put on whitehouse.gov?
No, that only makes it more doubtful, because his birth certificate, the hospital on the birth certificate, first of all, it's a certificate. It's a facsimile of a birth certificate. It's not, and no one's ever said this. I will. It's not a copy of the actual birth certificate. If I were to go to Highland Falls, New York, which is where I was born at West Point. My dad was a professor up there. If I went to Highland, I've done it, and because Highland Falls has the records of everyone born at the hospital at West Point, and I got a copy of this paper notarized. Well, it's notarized. Obviously, that's not it. I had to go to the Secretary of State of the state of New York, who sent me an actual copy of the birth certificate with the signature of the doctor who delivered me. We've never seen that. And also, the hospital that's on his birth certificate didn't exist. It was a different name when he was born. That's its current name today. I don't know how you do that.
Mike O'Brien is author of America's Destruction of Iraq. You can check out his website, warfare-inc.com. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks, John.
Up next.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.